once we're done,
Oh no. All right, let me stop that.
start. So we're on air, correct?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Let's give a few minutes to everyone to get comfortable and get seated, folks. I know we have a typical spike in attendees a few minutes after the time. So actually, if we could put a maybe recording on pause just for a minute, would you? Excellent, it's being recorded. Okay, so guys, everyone, hello, folks. Thank you all for joining. Welcome to the Large Scale Scrum of New York City Meetup virtual event.
This meeting is being recorded.
There's some echo there in the background. I'm Gene Gendel. I'm the organizer of this meetup group, also LeSS coach, trainer, and practitioner and enterprise coach out of New York City. Today, I will actually share with you some of the content that I thought would be very useful and very applicable to many because it's related to something that may not necessarily be less specific, but we will address it from the perspective of large-scale Scrum adoption. Before I get started, I would like to give a quick shout out to Nutanix, the company that's in business of enterprise cloud platforming. They kindly offered a high capacity Zoom channel for today, and that's what we're using. Unfortunately, we don't have FaceTime with any of you. I don't. I wish I did. But instead, we're gaining a higher capacity channel so more people can join. I'm gonna spend no time discussing myself. I'm pretty transparent in the cloud. If you would like to reach out to me, you can always do so. I have a number of ways you can reach out to me with more questions: email, LinkedIn, my site, also the meetup. I would like to offer everyone to join if you're not a part of the meetup, and my personal Zoom channel, which is free. You just join and ask questions or just collaborate with one another, okay? Some upcoming training that's also publicly available. One thing I would like to kick off saying first is that, and it's kind of, I'm gonna take it twofold. It is very important to understand that organizational structure is the first order factor or variable, if you will, that has impact on the organizational ecosystem. Everything else, although it might sound like it's an important thing, it is an important thing, it just follows. Culture, mindset, behaviors, norms, all these things are pretty important to us and we hear about them so much, but they are secondary, they're corollary to organizational structure. And of course, things like metrics, velocities, OKRs, all these nicely sounding jargon words, they are also there. They're important. They're not completely trivial, but they come secondarily. And this is unfortunately what we often see people that are that have been given the privilege of leading organizations and advising senior management. This has not been stressed enough. Organizational design is the first order factor that defines system dynamics. Everything else just follows. Now, interesting, I pulled it up recently from the net by Explore Digital. I think they're doing surveys. So the 14th annual State of Agile report says that pretty high numbers, right? 48%, 46% respectively of challenges with adopting and scaling Agile come from organizational resistance to change and not enough senior leadership participation in the effort. So that's a pretty significant number, is it not? Now, if we look at the same from the same report, we notice that these two, they refer to as frameworks. At least one of them is not. Scrum is not a framework. It's just a way to bring Scrum Masters together for coordination. In fact, it's a mislabel. But in any case, these two have such a high percentage of success and market penetration. So that raises a very natural question in my head, at least. How did they manage doing this? I mean, what's the recipe for success? And to me, it's a simple formula. Degree of framework implementation success is inversely proportional to how a framework challenges organizational design problems. So you can unpack and install something that's very complex and very magnificent as it looks like, but if it changes nothing, of course, it will be perceived as, as one of its own, right? So I would like to approach today's conversation from the angle of first dissolving, or at least addressing some of the some of the illusions and misunderstanding about estimation. Because why? Estimation seems to be a pretty important thing for everyone within the organization, whether it's an agile organization or trying to become agile organization or very traditional organization. Everyone cares about estimation. So I'm kind of using the back door, the back channel to get into this discussion. I'm going to use estimation as the catwalk. But I would like to look at some of the illusions first. I would like to dissolve some of those, and maybe this will pave some road, will clear the road for us to discuss how estimations could be done in a better way. Okay, so first, illusion number one. We can relabel existing loosely coupled single function, single skill set specialist groups with fancy terminology while not changing the overall organizational design, and expect that these groups somehow will function as if they were real, well-formed, normed teams capable of accurately estimating individually as well as at scale when you have multiple teams doing the same. So the claim here is that this is an illusion, and oftentimes we see people fall into this trap. Now, I would argue that taking an existing organizational structure, flipping it on its side 90 degrees, now calling it a chapter, while preserving all of the elements of the original structure, such as reporting lines, management relationships, individual performance, is a masquerade. Now, if you take existing geographically dispersed single function specialty component groups managed by engaged managers and technical leads and relabel it into a squad, it's also masquerade. Now, if you take this squad as an organizational building block, which is ill-structured, and shove it into the tribe, another nice term that we often hear people using, and then take an existing portfolio of programs or projects that have been traditionally stapled together and shove these so-called squads now within the tribe and say, we're going to work on what used to be a portfolio. That's another masquerade, okay? Now, in my language, it's actually relabeling, right? In my professional language, you're relabeling existing organizational structures and existing roles and responsibilities into new ones with the word agile to them. It's a theater, it's a relabeling, it's a masquerade. Of course, if you take this squad and expect it to estimate accurately any kind of work, you're not going to be able to do that. Or it's going to be a very poor degree of accuracy, let alone precision, because nothing really has changed about the way it operates. It's mostly terminology changing. My second illusion would be this. We can sprint by a single function specialty team, for example, BA or architecture, dev, or QA team alone. And these teams would be sequentially scheduled or within a single component development effort, such as UI, UX design only, or middle tier only, or database only. That requires a lot of tail-end integration, with neither approach delivering PSPI, potential shippable product increment, and then expect that cumulative estimations from these individual siloed teams somehow will add up to an accurate estimation. That's an illusion. This is a graphic that perhaps will help us understand why this is an illusion, right? You have analysis sprint, and you have a design sprint, and you have development, and then you have a testing sprint, and all of then you have PSPI. This is mini waterfall within Agile. Nothing is different from what we used to do, but on a smaller scale. So if we ask these teams to estimate, and we try to add their estimates front to back, we're going to end up with a very inaccurate overall estimation. And of course, we need a lot of coordination, a lot of guessing, a lot of coordination that is done by external coordinators and hands-off people. Here's another example. You got a bunch of component teams sprinting side by side, even on the same feed, on the same schedule, and then having massive integration and bug fixing in the end, so that there's only one time they can do PSPI going out the door. Another way of fooling yourself by saying, well, if we add these estimates with these estimates with these estimates, we can actually predict accurately when they're going to deliver. There's really no reliable metric when we take this approach. So hoping that this is going to actually translate into you know, a reliable and something that you can stand by estimation is an illusion. Now, of course, I would consider these as fake Scrum and fake scaling, right? Although one is more obvious than the other, this is fake. Of course, if you look at the good Scrum, it's even one team towards the end of the page at the bottom, when each team cuts across all of the components and delivers potentially shippable every sprint, then you can say, well, by gauging, by measuring how much is being delivered at the end of the sprint, forecasting and estimation could be much more accurate. And that's a true statement. Now, another illusion, we can place, literally bury development teams very deeply underneath an organizational structure, ask them, that is teams, to estimate work and then expect that estimates will remain reliable as they get rolled up the complex organizational structure, going through multiple layers of translation, refabrication, and padding. Okay? Now, imagine this: you put a Scrum team in the basement, even if it's properly structured, cross-functional, cross-skill set, cross-component cutting, multifaceted team of full stack developers. Even so, even if you put it under the layer of managers, conductors, coordinators, orchestrators, architects, DevOps, and system engineers, and bury them under KPIs and RAGs and metrics pressure, and put more layers on top, and more layers on top, and more layers on top, and only then somehow you end up with a customer layer. Then what would you expect?
Hey, Gene, can I interrupt you for a bit? I think Leslie Ann has a question. I will unmute her.
I would like to take questions slightly towards the end, if we don't mind. Okay?
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Please do. Please do. So what about customer centricity here? How about feedback loop length between customers and developers? Where is real organizational agility, adaptiveness is when you have such a heavy, monolithic, so heavy, so complex, so cumbersome organizational structure? Of course, what has changed if you compare this versus what has been done before the installation of this? Now, this is just this version, but of course there will be many more to come. Now, estimation as it flows up the chain of command with multiple padding and refabrication would be so much less accurate. Okay, and of course, estimation and prioritization come side by side and goes back to customer centricity and feedback loops. So if customers are so far away from actual producers, from doers, how can they estimate? How can they prioritize effectively based on authentic, original estimation? With this amount of organizational layers and structures in between, it's almost unreal to expect any sort of accuracy. Of course, like I said, this is just one version. There will be many more to come. I'm a bit of a cartoonist, and I like irony. So I think sometime in the near future, everyone's birth certificate will have a certification number on it. So people need to be born with that certification. This way, they don't need to go through the process of getting recertified before they get into a job, into a role. Next illusion. We can coordinate multiple teams through a complex fractal kaleidoscope-like schema of Scrum of Scrums, delegating coordination to Scrum Masters, not individuals, not teams, and team output owners. And some people may ask, what's that role? I'll explain in a minute. Each team has one of each, by the way, one Scrum Master, one team output owner, and then expect that collective estimation by multiple teams can be added up accurately and communicated up reliably. Now imagine these teams being collectively put in the kaleidoscope is the toy that some of your children may have when you flip it, when you twist it. You have a lot of fractal images. So this is effectively what I'm alluding to by fractal design. And of course, you have a lot of coordination happening in between, and a lot of coordination happening in between. Now, what is a TOO? TOO stands for something that's very interesting. You may not know the term. It's not a Scrum term. It's the Scrum bastardized term. It's called team output owner. We're gonna spend a few minutes discussing it. But before I get to the TOO, let me say something. This organizational design actually is not even necessary, right? Because with this come things that we do not want to see in Scrum, let alone large-scale Scrum or any kind of scaling. We end up having team private backlogs with a lot of local optimization in each backlog. We have dedicated team, TO stands for team output owner, someone who is responsible for the volume of not shippable work that each team produces. And of course, Scrum Masters estimating in a silo on behalf of those teams. Now, in cases like these, product size matter. Quite frankly, we recommend in large-scale Scrum, do not scale unless you absolutely must. Only if you have a very large product that requires more than 2 teams working together on it. So in large-scale Scrum, it's 2 to 8 teams working together, but in a very different from this way. Only then you may want to consider scaling. Otherwise, just keep those teams separate and working on small products if those are truly separate products. Now, this begs the question, what's a 2? 2, and I refer you also to the great video by Michael James of Seattle Scrum. 2 is a team output owner. It is someone who has no authority, no organizational power to set priorities, who is not a real product owner, who is the fake product owner. We call him a team output owner because he or she is responsible only for output, not for outcome, not for strategy, not for mission, not for vision. This could be pretty much anyone who is accountable, but not really in charge. Anyone who is really both in this role, a manager, an analyst, an engineer, could be that person. And maybe within your organization, you have similar situations. An amazing video I recommend watching. Everyone should watch this about harmful misconception of the role of the product owner. And this comics book by Michael James, the YouTube video link would be in this slide deck. It talks about this dysfunction. Now, where do they come from typically? Well, they come from this. I also like cartoons. So usually we get a TOO from this role. And of course, you know, we understand the irony behind this cartoon. It's the masquerade. It's another theater. It's another mask show when used to be a project manager, now plays the role of Scrum Master, and used to be a BA, plays the role of product owner, doing pretty much the same thing they used to do. And the team gets the short end of the stick. Now, where do they typically go? They end up here. They end up here sitting very deep within teams, responsible for things that are very administrative, very administrative and very granular. The real product owner could be way upstream, okay? With many translation layers, proxies and proxies of proxies, and BAs on both sides. Hey, you bring one of your senior BAs, I'm gonna bring one of mine. Throwing these requirements over the wall, and ultimately then they end up in hands of the team output owner, who is responsible for literally whiplishing the team to make sure they produce. Illusion number 5. Interesting, and many companies probably have this pain. We can build a good team made of external vendors, workers, initially high quality people. And correct me if I'm wrong, but usually when you engage with a vendor, you speak with the best of the best of the best. But then quietly substituted by low quality single function specialists that cannot work, let alone estimate independently, and therefore requiring vendor management leads and project coordinators to provide estimates on their behalf in order to honor fixed everything SOWs, SLAs with many conflicting priorities. I wonder how many people on this call have experienced the same. Okay, I have a plenty. Imagine a client company. And many vendors that support this client company, they won the bid. You got each vendor company supplemented their own engagement lead, deeply embedded with the client company. These people manage and provide estimates on behalf of their people to a client company. And you got this superficial, or phantom orphan cloud somewhere in the space when you got so-called teams. They're really not teams. They're just groups of people stapled together, representing different vendors, They're doing very mundane, very laborious work without really thinking about what they're working on, okay? So this is the typical setup that we often see. And of course, with this kind of setup, relying on any kind of estimates that are being produced by engagement leads on behalf of people who are almost like a revolving door, they come and go, is extremely, extremely unreliable business. It's a very bad proposition, okay? So I'm gonna pause just for a second before I go into how is LeSS different. And if there are any questions, I'll take one or two. I see some comments, but it could be a little more, a few more. I'll take a question or two. Going once, going twice. Okay, let's move on. So information flow in large-scale Scrum, first and foremost, about how does information flow. Now, this picture you probably have seen a plenty. This is the frontier. That's the graphic that describes large-scale Scrum on LeSS.work site and in slides of many trainers and practitioners you have seen. Now, clearly, we take this very differently from the fractal approach I saw. I showed a few slides back. There are no multiple product owners in large-scale Scrum. There's only one. There was only one, just like in Scrum, large-scale Scrum is Scrum. There's only one and only product owner who is responsible for priorities, strategy, mission, vision, etc., etc. So large-scale Scrum is Scrum. Let's make sure we understand that. There are no private backlogs, that could lead to lots of local optimization, fractalism, and other bad things. There's only one product backlog for the entire LeSS product group. Why? Because they work on the same product. And of course, there was only one truly potential shippable product increment in the end, okay? Not multiple. And of course, when we talk about LeSS events, there's only one sprint review because there was only one LeSS. Information flow. This is something, so many of these channels should be common sense to you guys because this is just, typical, right? The product owner has a short catwalk to a Scrum Master, a very short and very thick catwalk to senior management, as well as customers and users. Now, this is often being on demand in Scrum with many translation layers sit in between, direct communication between customers, users, and teams. Because what we say in large-scale Scrum, and we stress it at plenty in Scrum, but even more so in large-scale Scrum, as much as possible, clarifications flow through users and customers directly onto teams. We reserve prioritization only for this channel, product owner to teams. But as much as possible, users and customers are responsible for providing clarifications. And therefore, of course, degree of inaccuracy is not obsolete, of course. It could be still there, but it's significantly lower than if you had multiple organizational tiers and translators sitting in between, okay? And of course, when we, before we flip an organization to large-scale Scrum, we do a lot of prep work, and we don't obviously blow the entire organization out of the sky. We take just one product group at a time. We make these preparations before we go. Of course, much more to say on that front. So LeSS is not, this is something that people love seeing, copying and pasting, copying and pasting, copying and pasting, copying and pasting, a bunch of teams that are doing their own little thing. And if your organization is in pursuit of claiming a credit, hey, we're scaling now because we got 100 million teams going to daily scrums, that's the way to demystify what's being done. It's an illusion, right? You may have even, so if you have a few properly structured Scrum teams working on their, from their individual backlogs on clearly distinct products, then there is no need to scale. They just do great work on very independent products, and that could be very possible. However, if you did not define your product right, and you have a massive body of work, very componentized, very component-centric work, being done by a bunch of teams that are claiming that they're doing Scrum, but really they are just working in components, on components, that's really not scaling. They're just copy-pasting. A bunch of teams going through the same motion of iterations and sprinting and delivering in the end IOU instead of a potential ship, instead of PSPI, that's an illusion, right? So large-scale Scrum is different, right? Large-scale Scrum is 2 to 8 teams scrumming together on the same product. On the same product is the key here. It is not many teams doing their own little Scrum somewhere else. Different people with strategy and vision and mission in charge of different priorities of different teams is not scaling. So this is probably not the best analogy, but that's as good as it gets in my mind. 6 horses being guided by five, 6 different jockeys, competing with one another, not running for the same goal because each one wants to outperform another team, another horse. That's really not Scrum. Now this is, you might argue, if X number of horses pulling the same horse carriage in the same direction, being guided by the same person with strategy, vision, and mission, that would be Scrum. I'm sorry, that would be LeSS, because LeSS is Scrum being worked by up to 8 teams on the same product for the same product owner out of the same backlog on the same product. Another way to look at this is this. If you have 4 teams sprinting together and you have, of course, lots of opportunities for coordination and integration throughout, okay? That would be a large-scale Scrum. With that, you get an ability to refine your backlog together, plan together, and coordinate directly, not through interim layers and translators and coordinators. And of course, it's important to make sure that they're all parallel as opposed to being staggered. Because if you have staggered sprints, ability to coordinate and integrate is going to be extremely hindered. It will be impossible to work all of the same head of the trunk and, you know, checking in and checking out in ways that is not too disruptive to other team members and other teams. Okay. So let's take a look at some of the coordination opportunities in large-scale Scrum that make estimation in large-scale Scrum much more reliable. Okay. Well, first of all, let's take a look at this slide. It talks about the one of the key events in Scrum. Also, it's a very important event in large-scale Scrum because large-scale Scrum is Scrum. It's called PBR, Product Backlog Refinement. Now, there are 2 places where people from different teams get together. Now, in the beige box at the top, we got team representatives meeting with product owner, with a product owner, and obviously looking at the product backlog. Now, keep something in mind. This is not a Scrum Master representing teams. This is not Scrum of Scrums, or Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, or Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums. This is not coordination. This is actual, I'm sorry, let me rephrase. It's not coordination by people that are hands off. It is discussion. These are discussions by people that are very much neck deep into development and product-centric work. These representatives may potentially rotate from sprint to sprint, but they are real doers. They're real hands-on people that have the right professional, skill set wise, and of course moral, to represent their own teams. It's a relatively short event where people come together and discuss what is it going to be the most important set of items that need to be refined for future sprints. And of course, the product owner sets that directive. It's a relatively short event. It's a short event because there isn't much deep dive going in there. Now, down below, you see 2 boxes, blue and the yellow, the blue and the yellow. Now, we actually don't like blue boxes in LeSS. Why? Because in the blue box, what is illustrated is a single team doing their own backlog refinement in a silo by themselves. Now, from time to time, we may have this case when something is so specific, so unique in a backlog that requires this team's superb expertise or for whatever other reason, and they take it on their own. Now, of course, the outcome of this still is going to be the same item, just better refined, going back into a backlog because no one is taking work into a commitment at the moment. It's just a refinement, it's not planning. Now, we actually very much like the yellow box. And this is actually the meat and potatoes here, right? Because there's so much going on here. Individual, like each team, not just representatives, but full teams, entire teams are engaged in direct conversation with the customers and users to understand, to refine backlog items that are high in priority at the top of the backlog. And it's a pretty time-consuming event. If you think of it, 5 to 10% of each sprint, it's a pretty demanding event. So if you take a 2-week sprint, it's between half a day and 1 day in duration. And of course, whether you are fully collocated or you have multi-site development going on. By the way, do not confuse multi-site development with distributed Scrum. These are completely different things. We can live with one, but we strongly discourage the other one. Now, with this kind of composition within a yellow box, when there was so much cross-pollination in knowledge, there was a lot of promiscuity going on here. Although multiple teams come, people do not come with name tags. Hey, I represent Team Blue, and therefore I just only care about what Team Blue is going to take. Or I represent Team Red, and I only care about what Team Red is going to take. None of that. In a refinement discussion, everyone cares about improving quality of the backlog. No one knows yet, at least no one should know yet, which team is going to end up with which backlog item when they plan next sprint. This is a refinement session. Now, in between, during this session or anytime in between, and maybe outside of the yellow box, there was a lot of estimation going on. And we strongly, strongly recommend multiple people from multiple teams engaging together. And that's how we normalize. And that's how we, I don't want to say standardize, we normalize and we learn each other's estimation thinking, estimation mindset, how people perceive size and complexity. This is why in large scale Scrum with so much promiscuity going on in a good way, promiscuity in development, promiscuity in estimation, promiscuity in refinement. There's so much unity and so much collaboration going on. Now, more opportunities for coordination. Within that very product backlog refinement, if it's all physical and in the same room, which we strongly recommend for collocated teams, it's an open space. It's an open space with lots of charts, lots of graphs, lots of screens all across the wall. We really want a big room for that. And we have lots of customers and users participating. It's almost like a round robin. People come, think of it as a car show or technology show where you come to a showroom and you go from station to station and you learn about things. Okay. Lots of promiscuous collaboration, as I mentioned, directly with users and customers, not through conduits or translation layers. Okay. Now, we're not trying to pretend that in large-scale Scrum things are so unique in terms of estimation that we need some additional extraterrestrial techniques. Not at all. We actually do support a lot some well-known estimation techniques, such as planning poker. And of course, if you have teams that are in multiple sites with very simple but reliable technology can achieve this. Of course, if you have everyone in the same room, it becomes even easier. So this is not off the chart. This is not off the plot. We can easily achieve this. It's done by doers, by real doers, not by conduits, translators, managers, leads. No, actual doers are involved in the conversation. The main goal is not to produce a number, of course. It's the CART, conversation confirmation, the 3 C's, right? No need to be too conservative and pad your estimates or too aggressive while estimating and low down your estimates. Why? Because in fact, while estimating during a backlog refinement session or anytime in between, maybe you have some informal conversations before your next planning, no one knows who's going to end up with what. So there is really no subjective need to pad something or bring down it and make it more aggressive, because you are really, really impartial at the moment. You're kind of impartial you're impartial as a developer, as an estimator, because you don't know whether it's going to be your chunk of work or not. Okay, we strongly encourage in large scale Scrum for people to postpone thinking who's going to take what as long as we can until the last possible moment. These conversations actually take place during sprint planning. So just want to stress the important part here. it is not the estimation itself that has been redefined in large-scale Scrum. It's the way people work and collaborate that is making estimation of large-scale Scrum, I would say, significantly more reliable than the same number, the same group of people working in a traditional way. Because for the above mentioned reasons, of course. Right. So one more slide before we go and maybe take some questions here. Before we go into sprint, we obviously have sprint planning. And yet, before we do it, there is another set of events that help us improve our ability to work together as LeSS product group, and of course, impact positively the way we can estimate work. In the beige box here now, we have sprint planning 1 going on with, again, with team representatives representing individual teams. Could be the same people that were in the refinement session, just the sprint that was prior to this one that's coming up, or it could be different people, but they're clearly not hands-off people that understand development only in spirit. This is not Scrum of Scrums, or Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, or Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums. This is not mandatory, necessary coordination, necessary because of there's so much ad hoc silent work going on. This is not that. This is these are representatives, real doers from respective teams coming together. Now, what do they decide here? This is actually the point in time where they decide which team is going to take what in the upcoming sprint. Just like in the previous slide, we don't like the blue box. We don't like blue, blue team, call it here, a blue team, because it is an example of a team working and having to work together in a silo or with less collaboration and less interaction with the other teams than we would like to see. So this may be due to the fact that there's maybe a backlog item that is so specific and so unique to this team's today's skill set that it requires them to work on their own. There could be a variety of reasons why this team ends up doing sprint planning part 2 on their own. Of course, the outcome of this would be a sprint backlog. Do not confuse it, please. This is an on-point, very important. Do not confuse it with a private team backlog. It is not. Sprint backlog is an instance of a backlog that is only that only leaves for as long as your sprint is in flight for that team. Okay. In fact, we strongly recommend in large-scale Scrum to separate a facility where you keep your product backlog and your team and your sprint backlog. Like for instance, if you're obligated to use an electronic tool, maybe it's okay to use an electronic tool to keep a product backlog there. Very simple, like almost like a Excel spreadsheet simplicity kind of thing. But when it comes to a sprint backlog, use a different facility. But I'm a little bit off topic now. Now, we really like what's happening in the yellow space in the dotted circumvent line. Why? Because not only did these teams refine work together in the previous slide, they're actually planning the upcoming sprint together. And as they break down work items into smaller chunks, so they could execute them simpler and maybe show some workflow for themselves, right? Take a backlog item and break it. I'm sure people are familiar with terms, stories and tasks, right? Well, here is one, right? If you take a story, break it down into subtasks, small items, this is the time and place to do it. But on point, they do it together. And this is when and how they minimize the degree of uncertainty and potential friction that may happen throughout a sprint because one team does not know what the other team does. Now, we literally and explicitly and consciously gave up. We abolished the term dependency in large-scale Scrum because it just has such a negative connotation. But we use another term, we say opportunities to work together. It's actually a few words together, right? So if there is any hint or any suspicion that one backlog item has something to do with another backlog item, and two different teams are going to own these items, there's a great opportunities for people from each team to coordinate and work together directly without translation layers, without conduits or other people that sit in between. In the end, it doesn't matter which team produces what velocity, which team has what kind of output. It matters not. What really matters is maybe if we talk about velocity or output, it would be for the whole product group, less product group, and that's up to 8 teams. So it doesn't matter if one team has a velocity of 5 and another one is a velocity of 35. Maybe that was by design, by definition of the original team composition. That's what it was meant to do. Was meant to be. Okay. So tons of opportunities to coordinate and work together and collaborate. And of course, when you do this, your language normalizes. It's like you take two people or two groups of people that speak different language, you put them on the same inhabited island for X number of months or years, and in a couple of years you will realize they ended up with some sort of a, gibberish that is a combination of both languages. They understand each other, and that's what we're trying to fulfill here in large-scale Scrum. If we put them on different islands and have boats going back and forth coordinating, then of course they will always remain speaking different languages. Last but not least, so of course sprint planning is this, right? And everyone their mother comes together, and with that, you don't have any team private backlogs. You break down work together. You look for planning opportunities to work together. You're willing to help each other inside a team and across teams, okay? So that actually brings us to another channel of communication that we need to explain here. But before I do that, let me just say one more thing. In large-scale Scrum also, we have all hands on deck sprint review when everyone comes together. In fact, these are not representatives. These are real teams, entire teams come together. This is like an open space bazaar type of event. And of course, tons of cross-pollination with knowledge and feedback and other good things. I'm not covering any other events such as team retrospective and overall retrospective we covered in training. This is just a slightly different off topic. And just before we finish off, let me say something else. There are a lot of important communication channels in large scale Scrum other than these well-structured, minimalistic events. So we take we take Scrum as a foundation and we add a very bare minimum on top of it to help us coordinate and support a work by up to 8 teams. And that's what we just covered in those slides. Very superficial, of course, but we're just concentrating on the dynamic of estimation and what leads to accuracy of it. But there is much more to say, of course. But there are some additional channels of communication and information flow that make all of this more reliable in the end. Well, the secret technique, of course, is just talk. There's a high degree of transparency and collaboration between different teams. Whether they are co-located or on different sites, we very strongly encourage just talk technique, or there's an extreme version of it, it's called just scream, right? But we discourage any way of going through multiple conduits, multiple translation layers and delegation of this responsibility to someone else. A developer should be able to talk to a developer, whether it's by phone, by IM, or face-to-face. Travelers and scouts is a pretty interesting thing. So a scout effectively is someone who is being sent by my team to your team to sneak up and look up some of the great techniques you may have developed. Maybe you're doing some great pair programming, or you're automating tests at such incredible rate that we would like to learn how to do it. So we send one of ours to sneak up and look over shoulder one of yours. Please do not confuse it with shared resources or any of that nature. This is one team sending off their own person to another team. A traveler, another important role that a person could play. So if my team has a very senior Oracle database person who is very seasoned, very knowledgeable, we can send him off. We can send him or her off for a few sprints to join other teams, to teach them, to cross, maybe to pair program, to give them his knowledge. And of course, maybe he or she will do like a round trip from team to team to team and then come back to his own original team. And so what? We lose a person, yeah, we'll lose this capacity for maybe for a few sprints, but other teams will gain. The ultimate goal is to develop a product. The ultimate goal is to increase efficiency of the entire LeSS product group. Now, we already mentioned about open space. That goes without saying. Any opportunity we have, whether in person or physical or virtual, you can actually run a virtual open space. There are some good techniques out there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but we encourage as much as possible people doing things together and seeing same exact, seeing same good results. Now, please do not confuse it with big room planning. It's the beat up term that is being used traditionally by many organizations when you have senior managers and managers of managers and PMO and other non-doers coming together and planning, 3 years out, basing this on very unreliable data that has come to them through multiple chains of command and organizational layers. That's not it. So big room planning, it's in fact, we strongly discourage it in large scale Scrum because it almost adds no value. It's very costly for organizations too, because you have to fly people from all over the globe, but they are not real doers. Senior managers and managers of managers. Finally, component mentors, a super important role here. And this is, of course, a way to say, so for instance, if you have someone who is a very senior, very knowledgeable in a given component, this person used to be a component manager or component lead, and nobody was able to touch that component because it was that person's sphere of jurisdiction, right? That's my stuff, that don't touch it. If you need it to be tweaked, to touch, you come to me. We come from a completely different angle here in large scale Scrum. We actually cherish and support these senior people with a lot of knowledge and expertise. We ask them to become mentors. Now, of course, this is an organizational change. It has to do with HR norms and policies, motivations, incentives, and other ways, and other things that impact individual ambition and objectives. But if you turn a senior person into a mentor, into a teacher, you can go a long way. Now, this person now ends up teaching others, educating others on things that used to be only him or her for him or her to touch. So now you are multiplying, amplifying someone else's ability to deliver work by giving it to so many more people. So you have many more educated people, capable people that are able to touch that component, as opposed to having this hard dependent. This is where dependencies are, right? You have a hard dependency on a component team or a component lead who becomes a bottleneck and no one else can touch that component but those people. We kind of go away from that. We go towards, if you know something, teach others, okay? But for that to work, we need to make sure this person is willing to do it. And this is an organizational decision, and this is an organizational way to support this person. Of course, if so many more people can do it and so many more people can talk about this eloquently, in an educational way, then you are decreasing the degree of inaccuracy and increasing the degree of accuracy, or maybe precision too, in the way they discuss complexity, discuss size, and of course estimation. Okay, and last but not least, here it's a community. We strongly remember we had a slide at the beginning where we had an organizational tower flipped on its side 90 degrees and being called a chapter. I don't want to digress into saying, whoever was in the first place at the small company of 50, 60 people, experimenting with that, not even a model, not even a framework, none of those. An experiment, right? I'm not going to use that word. You know what I'm referring to. What they meant by a chapter is completely different from what majority of organizations do today. So we stress this explicitly in large scale Scrum. A community is a self-organized, horizontal organizational structure that doesn't have pecking order or reporting structure. It is not it's not mandatory. It is by volunteering only, and it's for functional learning only. We create one when we need one, and we disband one when we don't need one. And of course, component mentors oftentimes are great people to become community leads or community organizers to run, Lean Coffee or Java dojos and stuff that is really educational. Okay, so that's a fundamental difference in the way we perceive a community, and some of the misunderstanding we see out there. Okay, so with this kind of cross-pollination and learning, and with this kind of collaboration and opportunities to teach others what you know, and learn from others what you don't know, your ability to speak the same languages goes up. And on point, large-scale Scrum isn't about blasting your entire organization out of the sky, 5,000 people overnight and calling it a success without changing anything. It's a deep and narrow as opposed to broad and shallow ability. It's a deep and narrow as opposed to broad and shallow way to scale product development by descaling organizational complexity. And because we stay small and deep, right, we are gaining something in return. Lots of learning, lots of cross-pollination with knowledge, lots of autonomy, and lots of normalization. There's a lack of a better term. We normalize our understanding of size and complexity, and our ability to estimate just goes so much higher. So I'm going to finish this off by saying this. This is a simple function, right? If estimation and forecasting, planning, and budgeting are important to your organization, then consider improving an overall organizational design and team structure, because this is the first order factor in the then clause. Why I say budgeting here? Because it's all about budgeting in the end, right? If you cannot estimate accurately, you're going to end up improperly budgeting, inaccurately budgeting. And we can just open up a whole other discussion about what agile budgeting should really be. And some of the shortcomings and pitfalls we see when budgeting is becomes secondary to poor team design and inability to work together, and some other things that we have highlighted in today's conversation. That's pretty much it. So I'm done with what I wanted to share. Of course, to unpack this entire conversation and take this further will take hours and days. But as far as estimation goes, I think I give you some hints. Any questions? So let me see if I can read some of these. Okay. Any tips I'm going to start backwards from Steve. Any tips for picking team representatives? And is there a ceremony whereby representative communicates back to team? Like I said, it's the King Arthur's City of Camelot roundtable. Everyone will pick whoever they feel is the right person to go into, either sprint planning 1 or product backlog refinement session, the first part. It's really the team's decision. It's probably someone who understands what the team is able to do in terms of skill set, capacity, knowledge. It's a real team member. So on the real team, it's almost anyone is as good as anyone else. Should be. If we want to go by, well, maybe if you have multi-site development, that you will end up sending a person who is mostly conveniently located time zone wise in geography. Maybe you want to send off someone maybe who's a little more experienced in the expected topic of the discussion. But other than that, it's pretty democratic and pretty informal. Think of a question that's flowing too fast. Okay. Is there a ceremony where a representative communicates back to the team? There's no standing event other than, so large scale Scrum is Scrum. So whatever we know about in Scrum, same thing we do in large scale Scrum with very minimalistic add-ons. Like for instance, overall retrospective, it's something that we add on. Or, we have, the rest of the events are pretty much the same. So it's very informal. You come back to your team and you jump on a call, or you come together in a huddle room and discuss. It would be agile budgeting. Yeah, we need to have a separate conversation. Maybe we'll have one as standalone that follows this one. Would you please summarize again the difference between, so I unfortunately will not be able to do it. LeSS has absolutely, it's like comparing a tractor and an apple. I can talk about LeSS versus Nexus. I can talk about, to some extent, large scale Scrum versus a Scrum at scale with with some of the approaches.
Hey, Gene, there's Ramon has a question in the Q&A. Can you click into that?
Yeah, I'm actually reading the Zoom chat, so.
Right, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A, so don't want to miss that.
Q&A. I'm not sure how to get there.
I'll read this out. It says, so is safe and Scrum is a masking of the same cultural work process. What's the result of their popularity?
I'm actually the one that asks about the summarizing the difference between LeSS and safe. Safe has absolutely nothing to do with agility. I'm pretty adamant about this. So don't take it from me. Ask any Agile Manifesto co-signer or Scrum co-creator. It's got nothing to do with agility. It's got lots of Agile jargon in it, but it's got nothing to do with agility. Yes, you have Scrum somewhere in the basement, but most likely it's being done by component teams. So we really cannot compare, a tractor and an apple. We can compare an apple and an orange, or a tractor versus, a truck. But these are so different. It has nothing to do with one another. There's a gazillion of references online about safe. Just reach out to me and I'll be able to include you. I'll share. Let me scroll up a little. So what's with the question mark here? Could we call the masquerade BS? Yeah, you could. So are there any, so Mahbub, could you help me? Are there any explicit questions? How can you imagine this with a cyber physical system, mechanical, on this knowledge you need? It's a question from Jan. Not quite sure I know how to interpret this. How do you imagine this with a cyber physical system, mechanical, electrical? So it sounds like we're talking about Scrum and large scale Scrum, not for software development, but for some other industries. And first of all, there are case studies on it, on large scale Scrum. There are even many more case studies on Scrum being implemented successfully in hardware. So this is not off the chart. So.
Hey, Gene, can I just add something quickly here? I remember the designers and the manufacturing of the Saab fighter jet, they delivered their software in 2-week sprints.
That's right. That's right. Large scale Scrum and Scrum is not just for product, is not just for software development. So there's one question I see. In what kind of organization can self-organizing, no reporting structure community exist? So first of all, we're not saying no to reporting. We're not binary, we're not dichotomous here. Just because we do in Scrum or large scale Scrum, there shouldn't be no reporting. No, not at all. We look at quality of reporting, where it comes from, who it's being generated by and for whom, what goes in it, of course. If we have a status report that flows through multiple organizational layers, and by the time it gets to senior manager, it becomes so stale and so obsolete, it's almost useless, then of course this kind of reporting is useless. A product owner could come up with a very intuitive, very short, very succinct set of metrics or reporting type that it would be meaningful for him or her to communicate to senior management or business partners. We don't say completely no. It's not dichotomous. Just because we say no to documentation, just because we say less documentation, we don't say absolutely no to documentation. What else? Let me pick another one. Can see this in a financial organization or government organization as they are so structured. So what types of organization? Not true. In a way, we've seen plenty of experiments with less adoption in government sector as well as fintech. Now, of course, if we pretend that this is going to work by a big bang transformation for the entire firm, of many thousands of people, that wouldn't be accurate. That wouldn't be possible. Again, large-scale Scrum is not about checking the box and calling this a superficial win and washing hands and saying, hey, we're agile now. We look at small pockets of success, possibility of success, and we go there. So again, there's a pretty long runway of assessment and preparation before we flip a switch and start sprinting as a less product group. And of course, you need help with that. And something that could be given to you by a less coach or trainer. But we choose product. We have to choose the right product. We have to choose right people to be involved in less product development. We need to educate a senior management that is involved and supportive of this. So there are many things we have to go through. There's emotion. There are lots of emotions we have to go through. What else we got here? Who facilitates multi-team PBR meeting? Multi-team PBR meeting. So we're talking here. So first of all, I guess maybe it's worth mentioning, right? In large-scale Scrum, a Scrum Master is a full-time role. It's not a hobby. It's not a pass-through, something that someone will do on a weekend and then will go back to their other work. It's a full-time role that someone has to take dearly near to their heart. It requires a very seasoned person to fulfill the role. And a person who's in a capacity of a Scrum Master can handle between 1 and 3 teams, right? So it is my indirect way of saying that initially when a large-scale Scrum gets underway, some education and coaching at less events also can be done by Scrum Masters, assuming they understand less really well. But over time, it's the matter of mature adults coming together and getting work done. So as far as facilitation, yeah, facilitation, I would expect maybe some more knowledgeable, more senior, more seasoned, in less people to do this. But it's not about coordination. It's not about resolving dependencies. It's not about running in between teams and coordinating and being a conduit and translator. Okay. There are many case studies out there and actually illustratively show very vivid, very visual how teams come together during these events, like especially when it's an open space event. Yeah, there are people that are facilitators. Yes, you need facilitation from skilled individuals that understand facilitation techniques well as understand less really well.
Okay, I think we can continue taking questions for another 5 or 10 minutes. We have the time.
Yeah, we are slightly over time, so I suspect people might start dropping now if they haven't already, right? We have down to half what we had. Let's take another question or two. Just type them in the video, I'm sorry, in the chat room here, folks. While you guys are doing this. So I'm gonna make a mental note for myself to share with you some additional information you've asked. The deck, before people ask, will be posted on, I'll put on my site. I'll make it available and visible on the meetup, as well as the video recording. I think we are getting the video recording ASAP in the cloud. What else we got? Well, if there are no more questions, and I think there are no more questions, right? No one is raising a hand or typing anything. Oh, there's one. Well, thank you as well for joining, folks. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank everyone for joining. Hopefully this was somewhat material to you, and hopefully you will take some ideas and thoughts from it and maybe either ask more questions or try to implement within your respective organizations. As I mentioned, if you have any need for support or just have any questions, you can just reach out to me directly. My Slack channel is actually here let me actually paste it again here. 1 second. In the win. For those that haven't seen it. It's a little challenging here. Anyway, I will be sharing it. Chat. Hold on 1 second. Here's the chat. You can pick it up from there. We'll be sharing the deck. We will be sharing the video as well, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And please look out for the next event that's on the calendar of our meetup. See you guys all soon. Okay. Have a good one. Mahmoud, thank you very much for coordinating this and getting the video. I'm going to log off. I'm going to stop sharing and
Thank you, Gene.
connect offline.